Welcome to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset, the leading data and analytics company for the cannabis industry.
Welcome back to the High Rise, a laid-back, data-back conversation on all things cannabis, where we cover US MSOs, Canadian LPs, products, and market analysis through the lens of data. I am joined, as always, by Emily Paxia of Poseidon.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the High Rise.
It's so great to be back another week. We missed last week because of MJBizzCon. We're actually got to see you.
We did. It was quite the show it was two shows. It was MJ Unpacked and MJBizCon.
That's right. Quite interesting to see both overlapping like that. But I understand, you have the audience kind of all in Las Vegas, even though I found myself, and you probably the same, bounce around hotels, meeting at hotel bars, restaurants. It seems like a large majority of the conference was that.
Yeah, I had so many meetings off site of either location. I think that, so we had I've known George for a long time, who is the founder of MJ Unpacked, and he gave this offering to the investors to basically rent a conference room near the floor of MJ Unpacked so we could have consolidated meeting spaces. It was very helpful. I spent both afternoons there taking meetings with people. And it was also interesting because he allowed us to have a guest list, and people could come to our room even if they didn't have a pass to MJ Unpacked. So it wasn't like a gating factor for meetings. I will say it was incredibly helpful because the other half of the day I was spent running around the various hotels. And anybody who has spent time in Vegas knows that the scale of these hotels is so much more massive than it looks on the map. And there's this fight going on with taxis and the taxi lobby and Uber/Lyft. And so you kind of, if you're running to try to figure out where to get your Lyft from, you can often run into some issues. So long story short, I would say most meetings start a little bit late and everyone's like running and frantically trying to get to where they're going. But yeah, meetings in the Cosmo, the Wynn, the Aria, it was all over the place. And many people I met who, and maybe it's because of the world I inhabit on the investor side, but a lot of people didn't have passes to either show. They were just there to take meetings. And so I was thinking about the fact that did MJBizCon say they had 30,000 people?
I heard that number, yeah.
So, Sai, do you remember, like, when you're in this longer than I am, but the first year Poseidon sent someone to the first MJBizCon for us, there were, I think, 800 people. And then the next year there were 3,000, and then it went to like 9, 12, and then all of a sudden it was 27,000 before COVID.
Yeah, that's right. And, used to be in the Rio because the convention center wouldn't take the business. They didn't want anything to do with cannabis. I think Las Vegas was pretty cannabis unfriendly early on. Mm-hmm. And MJBiz, so the first year I didn't go, but we sent people from Leafly. So the marketing team went, and that was kind of par for the course. We still do stuff like that with any kind of new conference, right? It's like not the whole team versus, now where we had like 15 people there and exhibiting, and, you get tens of thousands of guests. But you mentioned George, and George was the founder, or maybe co-founder, was very much responsible for MJBiz originally. Mm-hmm. Split off from the company and started MJ Unpacked. This year was their first year, and it seemed like well received. I didn't get a chance to go, but I heard positive things. Sounded kind of like a Hall of Flowers, really focused on brands and retailers. And there's one thing that MJBiz maybe has some challenges with. It's just the scale, right? This industry is so big and so broad, and it touches so many corners. We talk a lot about the MSOs, the brands, but it's everything that makes these operators tick. From cultivation equipment to production, packaging, processing, everything in between, right? Data companies, you name it, they're all there. And it's all kind of a big mix of brands exhibiting. And so kind of having a focused event, I think interested a lot of people that ended up at that conference.
I think so. And I was saying, given the number of people and that we were meeting with, there probably were 40,000+ people at that in Vegas or in and around cannabis conference content. You know what I mean? I think it was pretty huge draw this year. I'm excited.
Yeah, it sure seemed like it. And that no badge thing, I've heard that happen a lot of years in the past, and maybe it's just accelerating because everyone knows that they're there, and there are so many meetings that happen in the hallways and at the hotels, and a lot of companies get suites to go visit. But yeah, none of that would happen, I guess, without the anchor of the event happening at the same time there.
Exactly. And I think that's exactly right. And I think for companies like yours and for the, technology companies, for brands, for retailers, I think it's good to have those passes for the floors to be able to do that B2B work. But then it is just interesting when you sit in the investor seat of this, of where you have to be running between. It is very helpful. Our team had passes to both events. I just didn't, because I knew what my schedule was already looking like. And it was good because everybody got to walk the floor. There's, when we first got into the space, one of the things I used to do was walk the floor to do like trend spotting. Like, okay, how many LED lighting companies exist now? How many extraction companies exist now? Because it's just a great way to kind of understand where the industry is gaining traction, where capital is flowing, or where capital is trying to grab attention. So it's definitely worthwhile to be at the shows and to walk the floors. And I heard there were very good panels, including Liz from your team gave a great talk, I understand. So
yeah, that's right. I didn't get to attend, but I did see the slides, and it's kind of tricky because we'd love to publish it, but I think MJBiz, because you present there, they don't want you to publish it freely, which is too bad. But hopefully they publish something, or maybe some content gets out there, because it's kind of like, if you weren't there, you're going to miss some great content. And I know, we always put a lot of time into these things, so
sure.
It would be nice to see that go into the wild. And if it does, we can let everyone know, put it in the show notes.
Yeah, but I thought one of the things our listeners might want to hear about is what it was like to be at the show, like what the tenor of the show was, what the attitude of the constituents who are attending. Because, I think cannabis, it's interesting. Morgan and I track a number of things more globally. And one of them is, for example, Google. I have all these Google alerts set up around keywords relating to the industry. And I've noticed that the alerts I'm getting have gone down in terms of the volume of coverage around the space. And it's interesting because I think that the last time I saw this was the last time the market cycled down. And it's like people start to lose interest unless they're going to write a fear-mongering article about the kids or something. But yeah, it's an interesting time. And I think that externally looking in, the sentiment, I should be talking to the mic, externally looking in, the sentiment around the industry may not be the most positive. But I know we were talking before this, but when I was in meetings with companies operating businesses in cannabis, it was quite the opposite of that. So I'm curious to hear your take as well.
Yeah, I think very positive sentiment, very excited, not reflective of maybe the media cycle or the public markets. It's kind of like par for the course in this industry right now. It feels like we're in this upside down world where, the publicly traded US companies are just getting beat up, but their numbers they keep posting continue to beat expectations. And also upside down, these companies are listed in Canada and the Canadian companies are listed in the US. And so public market sentiment is down, but the industry sentiment is just up. So it's, very, very positive. I'm sure some of it is like, well, we're all happy to be together again. Great to see some old friends, make new friends, all of that. But yeah, generally I guess you'd expect a little more, like complaining about all the external forces that impact the space. But I didn't really get a lot of that. Not at all, really.
No, I mean, there was a lot of talk about how the markets have been brutal, but we were there doing business, right? And in the business of cannabis, there are really good things happening. And so I feel like that was the tone, and people were really happy to be back together again, to be, talking about the things that everyone's building, because there's a lot of exciting things coming. And I think, as we've talked about on this show extensively, especially this great new Northeast corridor that's going to be opening. I mean, it's just going to be a green line going into New England, which is just so great. So anyway, it was good.
Yeah, well, totally good. And that's a great segue into kind of what I want to talk about on the US MSO news. We spend a lot of time talking about New York legalization. Obviously, New Jersey's right on the horizon, but New York and its arguably very limited medical program in early October changed their regs to finally allow whole flower for cannabis consumption for medical patients. And I'm not really sure, what drove this. I think it's been a long time coming. It seems to be this case in some of these East Coast markets, maybe more conservative markets where they've legalized, they've prohibited flower, in the beginning. I think this happened in Florida early on, happened in New York. And I don't know if there's just some stigma with this idea of whole flower. So, gravitate towards things like tinctures and capsules that are maybe, more traditional medical formats, the way people think about, medical products. And so they're finally coming around. And just this week, so, today is October 27th when we're recording this, a Wednesday, and stores or dispensaries in New York are finally getting whole flower. And Columbia Care put out a press release this week saying that they were going to be the first to offer whole flower in New York. I think actually yesterday was the first day of sales. They claimed at one of their locations, with more locations starting today. I did a little spot check because there's really not that many operators, right, out there. And Curaleaf, I looked at a Curaleaf store, and they're offering whole flower as well. So I'm not sure, this first by hours or if they're really first, but brought it to our attention certainly. But a question I'd have, is like, how do you think about this? And do you think it's going to move the needle for the industry? I mean, it's a very, very small market, and there's 150,000 patients or so, and sales aren't that high. Do you think flower is going to change the game for them?
Yeah. By the way, did you see the pricing that like an eighth is going for in New York for dry flower?
I didn't write it down, but I think it's in there. I can.
Yeah, I meant to ask that earlier and I forgot. This is very new news, and I think it's exciting because you and I have been talking about, does New York start to open up? And you raised the good question as we were prepping for this, like, does it open up the qualifying conditions? Does it open up the access points, which have all been part of the reason that the New York market has not flourished as a medical market. But from what I hear, I do have colleagues, as probably our listeners know, I'm from the Buffalo area and lived in New York, so I have a lot of contacts back in the state. I went to school in upstate New York, and I think that what I've heard from people who are actual patients, like people with MS and other very qualifying conditions, is that the quality of the product in the stores as a finished good, like in those other form factors, has not been reliable or enjoyable for them in terms of the experience they have when they consume it. So I think it's one of those things where when you overthink something, you take it too far. And I think you know better than I do that the data points to the fact that flower is still the biggest category by a landslide in terms of what people consume. And the people who consume the most cannabis consume a lot of flower. And so I think that this is possibly good because in a way, like it's been a tough market to operate in. So I'm not trying to ding the operators there, but I think they haven't necessarily provided the best product experience for the consumers. So the consumers haven't been like, let me get back in that store and pay. It's also extremely expensive. Like a vape cartridge is really expensive there. So I think that what you're doing is it's a reliable form factor that people, it's unadulterated. It's flower. People know how to consume it, and it is available, and it may be more cost effective actually, but I do have to check the pricing, and it's the thing that people consume the most of in every single market. So I'm optimistic that this helps to point in a positive direction for New York, and that it's beneficial to the patients, because that's just been the hardest thing to watch in New York is people who really deserve access to medical cannabis who've not really had it to the extent that they should.
Yeah, well said. So I did just look up the price on Curaleaf, and Curaleaf has eighths for $50 published for whole flower. It's a little cheaper for ground flower, but the whole flower price is $50.
Okay, well, you can roll a ground flower into a joint, have a good old time. I don't know.
Yeah.
What's the scoop on? And like a vape cart there is like over $100, right?
Maybe.
Or at least it was for a period of time. Maybe that was like
probably.
And like, I know I have one colleague who is a patient whose closest store was that MedMen store, which is no longer, well, soon to be no longer MedMen, but they were having serious quality control issues. They were having to go back in with the products pretty regularly because they were either like half full when they got them home or things like that. And like, if you look at the list of qualifying conditions, these are not folks who want to be running back into a store. It's like,
No way.
Tough stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So a half gram live cartridge from Select, which is a Curaleaf brand, goes for $75.
Okay, so it's come down.
And they have some for $65.
Wow.
They're BWD Elite, Their SLR Elite cartridges. This is half gram though. And I'm going to look up what a select cartridge goes for in the California market and see how it compares.
35.
Is it 35?
No, I don't know. I'm throwing a stake in the ground.
Okay, good. Well, I'll pull it up while we're chatting.
Anyway,
here
maybe this is, the gateway to better and broader access, though, to other categories. And maybe New York, as we've hoped, maybe New York continues to open up as we move toward the adult use opening in 2023. Got a whole year to do it. So I'd be happy for the patients if they had more access. So who knows? Yeah,
totally. And like in Florida, sales significantly went up. And that's a great point about the flower category in general. It's anywhere between 40 and 50% in a given market of sales. And that's certainly not insignificant. And for something to not exist in a market like New York, that has to have some impact. It really does. I think it'll just depend on timing. I mean, the access is still so limited with, 3 stores, 4 stores per dispensaries, I should say, for medical per license holder. And there's 10 license holders out there. So it's really not that many for a population the size of New York. But, maybe we'll see. I know with adult use coming, they're going to expand those existing licenses and so on. But it certainly can only help move the needle versus, Florida, obviously flower helped with that, but also Florida's got a lot of locations.
A lot of doors now.
Exactly.
Well, and we've seen how this played out in California. We're still under 1,000 doors in this entire state. Like what?
Mm-hmm. I know, it's crazy.
There's a lot of people who live here. I just learned that in the greater Fresno area, there's over 1 million people. No. Greater Fresno is over 3 million. There's 1 million people in Fresno. That's a big city.
Wow. That's a big city.
Yeah, and that's like, just one. California's so big. And it's so big in so many places that people don't pay attention to yet. So anyway, that's just a sidebar.
So Elite Live, Select Elite Live, Gelato Live Resin Cartridge, single gram, not half gram, full gram, in California, pre-tax price, post-discount is how we publish it on Headset, $45 for a full gram.
So there you go.
Yeah, so significantly cheaper in California.
That's like halvesy.
Yeah,
actually, it's more because it's a gram.
Right.
So it's like a third probably, really. Okay. Well, that's what competition does. Competition is good for the consumer.
Very true. Very true. Well, it'll continue to expand. One last point on New York, I was thinking about, the patient count and it being small. Okay, now the flower is available. Maybe it will drive more people to medical out of the black market. And I was kind of looking at the eligibility requirements because sometimes that can be the limiting factor when it comes to access, right? It's like, well, it's just too hard to get a medical cannabis license or permit. So what I thought stood out, it's kind of, the traditional kind of condition list, and it's a long list, cancer, HIV, AIDS, ALS, Parkinson's, and so on. But it does talk about PTSD and chronic pain or pain that degrades health and functional capability as an alternative to opioid use or substance use disorder, which I thought was pretty interesting. It's very top of mind. I think there's a new series. I haven't watched this, but it's on Hulu with Michael Keaton about a doctor and the opioid crisis and prescribing and all this stuff. And I know we're all well aware of this, but I was interested to see that it was written so heavily into the regs here specifically. And so maybe that's something that, people can point to. And I looked in FAQ on New York's website, they mentioned that you don't have to be an opioid consumer and say, okay, I need to get off this. You can just choose it as an alternative. You can say, look, I don't want to end up on these type of pills. I'd rather try cannabis as an alternative, which is great. The question I think is, are doctors prescribing it like traditional kind of GP doctors, or do you still need to go to, a doctor that is, specifically writing these kind of scripts for people, more or less?
Yeah, I think it's limited.
I think it's still limited, yeah. And it's all a function of just the lack of research and, this catch-22 problem the industry's been in forever. But anyway, still good to see it there. Hopefully more people get access. Hopefully more people are interested now that there is flower and just progress. Anytime there's progress, I think it's good.
Agree.
So in the U.S., I think that's all I kind of had for today. But one thing I do want to call out is that, we are getting really close to earnings season. And we'll have some episodes coming up on that. I haven't looked at the calendar personally quite yet, but stay tuned. I think we'll cover that in some detail. And I'm pretty excited to see what the last quarter had in store for everybody.
Yeah, I think it's coming up 2 weeks from now. So
2 weeks from
starting
now.
right around 11/9 might be the first. Is that a Monday? Anyway, Tuesday. I think it starts right around November 9th, which I can't believe it's November, but yeah, I think we're going to have some special guests on just like we did during earnings season last time. So maybe we'll get Brady Cobb back and some other goodies.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll maybe talk next week about kind of what the schedule looks like, who's reporting when, and what we're going to be covering.
Totally.
Great. So moving on to Canadian LPs, and I don't know if this is an LP, so to speak, but Canadian retailers, High Tide, and their Canna Cabana store recently announced that they're moving to a quote-unquote discount club model. Discount club model. And in their press release, they mentioned it's modeled after a proven and leading membership-based grocery discount club retailer. And they, in more press release language, they say they're transitioning all of their retail stores to an innovative discount club concept with exclusive benefits and everyday low prices for members of its Canna Cabana Club loyalty plan, leveraging its existing in-house brands and product lines to provide an exclusive customer experience for its 245,000 club members, which will drive loyalty and, as press releases want to say, will expand the company's market share. So we'll see. We'll watch that for sure. But interesting kind of model. And so when I read this, to be honest, I wasn't super familiar on what makes a discount store versus like a dollar store, like as a discount store, like a club store, like a Costco specifically, or is it something different? And I think it's slightly different, but I think it has some parallels to club store models like Costco or Sam's Club. But there are a number of discount grocery club retailers in Canada that I was able to kind of look at as a proxy. And basically the takeaway is that they're really focused, like what sets them apart from maybe a traditional retailer would be that they focus on a limited assortment of products. So maybe you go to a traditional grocery store and you can kind of find everything, every brand you're looking for, but you go to discount and it's going to be quite limited. And they also lean into private label quite a bit. And private label is like Kirkland to Costco, right? Where it's the own brand only sold at those stores. And I thought this was interesting because, when we talk so much about vertically integrated MSOs, we're just talking about Select. I mean, in a sense, Select, depending on the market you're in, is a private label brand. But if you're in California, it's not a private label brand. Just like you don't see Kirkland products sold outside of Costco in California, but you would see Select sold outside of Curaleaf stores. But there are like strictly vertically integrated brands in cannabis. So kind of a unique model. I think the question I have, I think it really begs the question, like, does CPG, like a consumer packaged goods type brand, like a brand only, which is, traditional, kind of grocery model. There is obviously private label, but those stores' shelves are stocked with, I don't know, Mondelez or ConAgra or whatever foods, right? Like all sorts of food brands. And people go to traditional grocery to get those brands, right? Yes. Does cannabis, we talk about brands quite a bit, and brand loyalty is emerging and starting to grow, but is it enough of a pull, or is this a model that makes sense? And maybe we'll see more kind of retailers kind of hunkering down on their own private label products and only focusing on their products and not bringing in other products.
Did they say whether or not they'd have a club fee? I didn't get to read that part. Is there a membership, an annual like club fee?
I think they allude to it, but they say no fee for like existing members that were on there.
I mean, because that would be like an interesting like handcuff for loyalty, is to with Sam's Club or Kirkland or Costco, you pay a fee, and then you get quote unquote discounts. But don't forget that the size. The other thing I want to understand, like, I think one of the things they do well is you end up buying, you don't buy one toothbrush at Costco. You buy a pack of Oral-B toothbrushes, and then you've got to navigate that, or like you don't buy just like one thing of cereal. You get like a 6-pack or something. So it's a way to move mass product. And yes, I think that the Kirkland products or the private label, like I used to do consulting for CVS Pharmacy, and I couldn't believe it once I started getting in there how many private label brands they have that you would never know were theirs, which is very smart. And I see that as something that cannabis operators are doing too, because a consumer may not realize that Select is a Curaleaf brand, really, in a way. I mean,
right? You
just don't know, or that Dog Walker is GTI, or that Incredibles is GTI, or I mean, to an extent, they're still brands in many ways because they were brands that got acquired or were incubated and built as brands of their own right. And it doesn't just say Green Thumb on it or Curaleaf on it, but that's what private label brands are. They're housed by the parent. So I don't know. It's an interesting move, and I'm curious. I would have to dig in more because there are definite benefits to that kind of price club kind of thing, and if membership fees are something, and then I wonder if it opens up other promotional opportunities in Canada that are not because Canada has different regulations around packaging and advertising, and I wonder if you're in a membership of something, if it changes anything like that, because there are different laws around, for example, with Wine Country here in California, there are different regulations around what you can do with wine clubs versus just selling wine through the door of a tasting room. So there are different things that are associated with quote unquote memberships. So I'd have to dig in on it, but I do think it's an interesting approach. And in Canada, where they I think are trying to move product, it may be a way to like kind of bulk sell product into a consumer.
Yeah, great point. And I think Costco and the price clubs are certainly bulk focused. I'm not sure like discount grocery if it's so much bulk, but Costco also like has moved not away from it, but you can go and buy like an iPad, and you're not buying an iPad in bulk at Costco, right?
No.
So it's kind of, I feel like all the lines are so blurred in so many ways these days, and it's, everyone would try and bucket things like very clearly, like this is a discount store, this is a dollar store, this is a bulk store, this is a traditional store, but I'm sure it's just like a spectrum of types of businesses, like your point about the private label, where probably, there's a lot more than we see underneath. But you asked about the membership fee and the regulations, as you just called out. In their press release, they do say, regulatory environment permitting, the company may explore the potential to introduce a membership fee.
Okay.
So exactly your point, right? Regulations drive that. So it sounds like they're interested in it if the framework can support something like that.
Interesting. Well, it'll be interesting to watch. I actually love all this stuff. Like we talked about the cannabis superstores, like seeing Planet Hollywood in Santa Ana and in Las Vegas.
Planet 13.
Oh, whoops.
But Planet Hollywood is good too.
I think... I won't make any more comments about that. But, the point is that it's fun to see all of these different retail concepts and the levers you can pull to try to drive loyalty. And maybe, it's in our stage of the industry, we talk about this like a lot with when I'm running around doing diligence, like, are there brands that people come in and ask for? And if you don't have them, are they leaving, or are you able to introduce them to something else? And for the most part, you're able, from what I hear, there's disappointment around not having certain brands in stock, but in general, you can get them onto something else. And so now is the time to try to figure out how to establish loyalty with brands, and that can happen with your private label brands as well. Like Kirkland is a fan favorite. I think a lot of people, I don't know what to think about it, but I think a lot of people think that Kirkland's just as good as everything else. So I don't shop at Costco. I live in an apartment. I would drown in product if I ever shopped at a price club. But you know what I mean? It's like it's a whole thing. Like that's a way to develop loyalty. So
it is. And so I think it is like a good time to try something like this. Mm-hmm. In many ways, vertically integrated, MSOs in a limited license market where maybe they're not selling a lot of other brands are kind of this already, maybe without the call to discount. But interesting model, because I think without the power of like the CPG brands, I think you have a chance at success with something like this. I think if the brands had a lot of pull, then it could be a bad move, because maybe no one goes because they don't have the brands that you know and love at the Canna Cabana stores. So you just kind of avoid it. But right now, with kind of seems to be kind of wide open yet, could be an opportunity here. The Costco model is interesting. You mentioned Kirkland, and I was reading a bit about, Costco membership fees are actually higher than Sam's Club fees. There's Walmart connected to Sam's Club and all of that. But I did read that Kirkland, the prices are actually lower at Costco. So you pay a higher fee, but then the prices are going to be a bit lower when you go there. So all sorts of ways to kind of slice this. And in California, I remember a couple years back, and they're still around, the flower company out of Northern California made a lot of headlines about being I think the headline was the Costco for cannabis, and a lot of the media attention they got. They came out of a Y Combinator program. I think they took in $2 to $3 million of seed capital, and some guys there from Humboldt Legends, and been around in the space for some time, but kind of started with this model, which is a delivery, and they do have a membership program where you get, I think, free delivery or discounts, based on it, but they're trying this, in a way, and it's not one-to-one, because, like to Costco's not, I guess they have delivery, but I think most people still go to the big warehouses. When people think Costco, they probably think warehouses. It's maybe a proxy for this idea of club membership. You join the club, you get preferred pricing, you get cheap delivery, but they do sell a lot of brands. Like on the flower company's website, they have very well-known California brands scrolling across the bottom. Brands like Cookies and Canna and Caliva and so on. So it seems like a broad assortment versus maybe what I would consider coming out of a discount club.
So I belong to this thing called Thrive Market. I don't know if you have heard of this, but it's for people who it's kind of like just what you talked about with flour, where it's like there is an assortment of brands, but they do have a massive private label section of it. And in that instance, it's just Thrive and probably other ones that I don't even know. But it's like for people like me who, I'm a vegan or aspiring to be a perfect vegan, not a perfect vegan, but try. And I try to eat like whole grains and all this stuff. So, but it's a membership, and then I get deals on it, and they push special offers, and I get it delivered. So I don't have to go to a store for this stuff. So it sounds very similar to what you're saying, and they promote new kind of categories of products or new brands that are in this space too, so at special prices. But I pay a membership fee to have access to this, and then I get better pricing than, for example, if I did all my shopping at Whole Foods, or I don't really even shop at Whole Foods anymore, but my local market, which I love supporting, but it's extraordinarily expensive. So it's nice to be able to get like all your basics. Anyway, it sounds very similar to that, and I think it's very smart. I've actually discovered a lot of brands through this platform, because I think they may have like special partnerships, but I don't know.
Very interesting.
For cannabis, it's a great thing. We as a industry, right, we're advertising starved. Advertising and marketing platforms are completely limited. So having these different platforms to showcase and for consumers to get to try things where they think they're getting a good value is a great way to get through. So
totally. You mentioned your local alternative to Whole Foods.
Yeah,
but it's very expensive. What's the name for that type of retailer? Not discount, not bulk, not traditional, just
your precious
price.
neighborhood grocer. No, I love
precious retailers.
Yeah, they're both. I mean, it's funny. They're both like, there's Gus's, which I absolutely adore, and I support it very much with my dollars. And then there's this place called Luke's. So for some reason, it's all like, well, and there was a Gus, but we lost him, which was really sad. But then even I knew the guy who owned the store, and it's the Haight-Ashbury. So it was really cool because like the Grateful Dead anyways, really cool history to that store. So I do support it. I just spent too much money on papaya there last night, but it's like, it's that sort of thing. So you get a good experience, but it's
like literally like a mom and pop,
actual mom and pop. Yeah. But San Francisco likes to support locals. So now that Gus's, I think, now has 7 locations throughout the city.
Oh, that's cool.
It's very cool, but it is expensive.
I bet.
Yeah.
But so is everything in San Francisco, right?
It's just true.
Well, we'll see how this plays out. But, again, always interesting to see these different models. We'll see, how it works, and watch for the like parallels in the US and maybe watch to see how this actually performs now that they've officially made the transition here. I guess moving on, one area and kind of back to just cannabis in general, away from Canada. One thing we've talked about in the past in the show is Indica versus Sativa, and like, you know, how you frame the conversation around strains. And, you know, it's very, very close to me because of Leafly and kind of how we would talk about it. And, you know, frankly, we were talking about it in that way because that's how the industry was talking about it. And it's a very simple way to classify strains. And I think it's easy for people to wrap their heads around what it actually means, and do those names really mean anything is kind of the big outstanding question. And I think when you talk to any sort of cannabis connoisseur, you know, they can really tell you all about the cannabinoid profile and the terpene profile and everything in between that impact, you know, what makes a strain. But what was interesting was just this week, the journal Nature, which is a very like prominent, well-known journal from the 1800s, started in London. So, you know, I mean, this is like Charles Darwin stuff, right? Published a paper on strains and classification of indica versus sativa, cannabis labeling. The title of the paper is Cannabis Labeling is Associated with Genetic Variation in Terpene Synthesis Genes. And it's pretty interesting, you know, peer-reviewed research, but basically my like too long didn't read version of it is that it's the terpenes. And basically in their study, they found that the way strains get classified by whoever's doing the classification, the dispensaries, growers, is really based on the terpene profile, or they find patterns in terpene profiles. So terpene's like myrcene, which is the smell that's like really earthy. You know, you might get in like a diesel type strain, that kind of musky smell, tend to be classified as indicas, right? And I think that there are, I don't think the paper mentions anything about the effects specifically, because that's a hard thing to study. But, you know, anecdotally you hear about like, oh, earthier strains kind of makes you sleepier versus like a brighter kind of like a limonene type strain or terpene that's like a more citrus, right? Often kind of gives you a little more energy, right? Than that kind of musky, earthy. So you see like limonene type strains like being classified as sativas. So I think it's what we said. We'll have to go back and listen to the tapes to see how we talked about it. But I think we talked a lot about the terpenes driving it, and it's interesting to see a paper kind of confirming that, and the fact that it's in Nature. I mean, it's huge.
It is huge. I'm excited because I think that consumers are getting, you know, more savvy on cannabis as more states are opening and people are having more exposure to products. And, you know, I never thought I'd see the day where CBD is seriously everywhere, but it is. And I think that it's exciting because CBD is great. Every cannabinoid compound, in my opinion, is great. But what I'm excited for is the terpenes. And I remember in San Francisco when I used to get my recommendation through the Meadow platform, there was this guy, Dr. Dan, who was awesome. And he used to actually spend time talking about the thing I would be getting a medical card for, which was two things. I'm a nervous wreck because I invest in cannabis. So I have a constantly upset stomach, and then also can't sleep. So yeah, all because I invest in cannabis. But, you know, one of the things he was teaching me a lot about terpenes, and this is before Proposition 64 passed. And so
wow.
One of the things he was telling me is that for people like with stomach pain and all that, limonene is the terpene to watch for. And then nighttime, it's is it myrcene? Is the nighttime?
Myrcene's like the musky, heavy, earthy.
Yeah,
one.
I think that. What is the lavender one?
Linalool,
maybe. Linalool, lanolin.
Something like that.
Anyway, it was very helpful, and that was how I started to. It shaped my entire relationship with cannabis. And one of the things he said to me, I remember, was like, "Smell it, and if you're attracted to it, it probably means it's the thing your body needs." And it's funny because Eric Pearson, you know, Spark, longtime person in the industry, he always cracks up because if I smell one of our plants on the farm with a heavy limonene profile, he's like, "Oh, you'll like this one," because he just knows that that's like what I'm attracted to. So I think it's something that as a consumer, once you start to understand that, then I think you start to really dial in your preferences and have a much better experience.
Yeah, super interesting. And I think, the more language that consumers can use to kind of understand, to find what they're looking for, the kind of language to be able to identify that is important. The top of the paper here says that an analysis of over 100 cannabis samples quantified for terpene and cannabinoid content and genotype for over 100,000 single nucleotide polymorphisms indicated that sativa and indica labeled samples were genetically indistinct on a genome-wide scale. So it's like saying that the genomic sequencing didn't really show anything kind of unique. It said instead, we found that cannabis labeling was associated with a variation in a small number of terpenes whose concentrations are controlled by genetic variation. So it's all about the terpenes, I think, is the short of it. But I encourage everyone to check out the paper. We'll link it in the show notes so you can find it yourself and read an interesting article from the Nature Journal. Pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, very cool.
Well, I think that'll do it this week. Thanks, everyone, for listening. If you're a fan of the show, be sure you subscribe and give us a rating on your favorite podcast directory. It's always helpful. Stay tuned next week. We'll cover all the latest news, and we'll really talk about scheduling for earnings seasons. That's always one of my favorite things, to kind of look and see how these companies we always talk about are tracking and see how everything's moving. So stay tuned for that. Thanks, Emily, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset. For more information on Headset, visit headset.io.